Why does everyone think I'm sick? It started when my barista dropped my coffee and asked if I needed her to call an ambulance because I looked like I was about to collapse. I felt completely fine and had just gotten the best sleep I'd had in months, but she kept insisting I should sit down before I fell over. When I looked in the bathroom mirror at the coffee shop, I looked exactly the same as always, so I just thought she was on something. But then 2 other customers asked if I was okay on my way out. I got to work, and my manager did a double take and said I should go home. She said I looked gravely ill and shouldn't have come in when I was clearly suffering. I told her I was fine, but she insisted I take the rest of the week off and wouldn't let me back in the building. I went to urgent care thinking maybe I had some illness that hadn't shown symptoms yet. The doctor ran every test she could think of, including blood work and urine analysis and chest x-rays. Everything came back completely normal with my white blood cell count perfect and no signs of infection or disease anywhere. The doctor said I was one of the healthiest patients she'd seen all week, all while staring at me with this concerned expression. My mom showed up at my apartment that night with groceries and flowers, saying my manager had called her. She took one look at me and started sobbing, saying we'd get through this together and she'd take time off work to take care of me. When I insisted nothing was wrong, she accused me of being in denial and said accepting help wasn't weakness. She stayed the night on my couch despite my protests. Over the next week, I took photos of myself every day. I couldn't see any difference, but my sister insisted I looked worse with each passing day. Then my boyfriend Ryan got home from his business trip and froze on the spot. He immediately started making doctor appointments at specialists. He kept touching my forehead and wouldn't believe me when I said my temperature was normal. He started sleeping in the guest room because he was afraid of disturbing my rest. I had no idea what was going on. I wondered if something had changed with my makeup routine, so I went completely barefaced for a week. People's reactions got even worse, with strangers stopping me on the street to ask if I needed help getting to a hospital. An elderly woman gave me $20 saying I should get myself a good meal. A little kid pointed at me and asked his mom why I looked so scary. The dermatologist found nothing wrong with my skin. The oncologist my mom insisted I see ran full body scans that showed no tumors or abnormalities. The infectious disease specialist tested me for every rare disease and found nothing. Each doctor looked deeply worried while telling me I was perfectly healthy. My workplace started a meal train without asking me, and people kept dropping off casseroles and soup. Someone set up a crowdfunding page for my medical expenses that raised $8,000 before I could get it taken down. My neighbors started doing my yard work without being asked, and someone kept leaving fresh flowers on my doorstep every morning. I tried changing everything I could think of, including my hair and clothes and skincare routine. Nothing made any difference to how people reacted when they saw me. My own reflection looked completely normal to me, but everyone else saw something that terrified them. Ryan started talking about taking leave from his job to become my full-time caregiver. My best friend Claire finally agreed to tell me exactly what she saw when she looked at me. She said my skin looked gray and thin like paper, and my eyes were sunken so deep they looked like holes. She said I looked like I'd aged 40 years and lost half my body weight, even though the scale and measurements proved that was impossible. She said looking at me made her want to cry. I asked her to take a photo of what she was seeing, and when she showed me her phone screen, I saw myself looking exactly like I always did. She pointed at the photo saying, "Look at yourself." But I looked completely normal and healthy. We stood in front of a mirror together, and she described seeing something completely different than what I saw. After 2 months of this, I'd lost my job because they insisted I needed to focus on my health. Ryan had moved back to his mom's house because he couldn't handle watching me waste away. My family was planning some kind of intervention to force me into treatment for whatever they thought was killing me. Everyone I knew was convinced I was dying. Then I got a call from a woman who said she'd seen my crowdfunding page and recognized my situation. She said the same thing had happened to her 5 years ago and she'd found someone who could explain it. She gave me an address and said to come alone because the person was very particular about privacy. I drove 3 hours to meet this specialist, and when I walked in, she didn't react with horror like everyone else had. She just nodded and pulled out a folder full of photos. She said she could finally tell me what everyone else was seeing when they looked at me, but first I needed to answer one question. She asked me if I'd noticed anything unusual exactly 3 weeks before people started reacting differently, and that's when I realized there was one thing. 3 weeks before all this started, I'd stopped at the pharmacy to pick up shampoo and saw this new machine near the entrance with a big sign saying, "Free Health Analysis." The screen showed happy people getting their wellness scores, and it promised to email a detailed health report using just facial recognition technology. I stood in front of it and pressed the green button that said Start. The camera light blinked and the screen told me to hold still while it scanned my face. After about 10 seconds, it made a beeping sound and asked for my email address. I typed it in thinking this would be fun to see what some computer thought about my health. The machine printed out a receipt saying my full report would arrive within 24 hours. I forgot about it completely until the specialist asked me that question. The specialist nodded slowly and opened the thick folder she'd pulled from her desk drawer. She spread out dozens of printouts across the table, and I saw photos of people I didn't recognize with dates and locations written underneath. She pointed to each one and explained they'd all use the exact same wellness scanner model at different pharmacy chains across the country. Every single person in those photos had the same story as mine. Their lives fell apart when everyone suddenly started seeing them as dying, while medical tests showed perfect health. She pulled out a technical document covered in code and diagrams. The wellness scanner company had launched a beta program using new facial recognition algorithms to detect health issues. But there was a massive glitch in the programming that nobody caught during testing. The algorithm incorrectly flagged certain facial bone structures and skin tone patterns as indicators of terminal illness. She showed me the error logs where my face had been marked with codes for organ failure and advanced cancer. The corrupted data didn't just stay in their system, though. The wellness company had partnerships with hundreds of tech companies who bought access to their facial recognition database. Every time one of those partner companies' systems scanned my face, they received the false terminal illness markers. Medical offices use facial recognition for patient check-in systems now. Retail stores use it for security and customer tracking. Social media platforms use it for photo tagging and filters. She pulled up a map on her computer showing how my corrupted data had spread like a virus through interconnected databases. Within days of that pharmacy scan, my face was flagged as dying in systems used by thousands of businesses and organizations. The specialist explained that modern devices don't just capture images anymore. They emit specific electromagnetic frequencies that can influence how our brains process visual information. When someone's phone or tablet detects my face through its camera, it cross-references with these corrupted databases. The device then emits subliminal signals at frequencies below conscious perception. These signals alter the viewer's visual cortex processing, making them see physical symptoms that aren't actually there. She showed me research papers about how digital devices can manipulate perception through targeted frequency emissions. The human brain is surprisingly vulnerable to these influences, especially when multiple devices reinforce the same false signal. That's why everyone saw the same horrible symptoms when they looked at me. Their phones and computers were literally hacking their visual perception without them knowing it. The specialist's office had thick metal shielding in the walls that blocked all wireless signals. She'd removed all smart devices and used only analog equipment from before the digital age. That's why she could see me normally when nobody else could. She'd been researching this phenomenon for 3 years after discovering the first victims. She reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a small black device about the size of a phone. She explained it generates a counter frequency that blocks the corruption signals within a 10-foot radius. She turned it on, and I heard a faint humming sound. She pressed a button on her desk phone and asked her assistant to come in. The door opened, and a young woman walked in looking at paperwork. When she glanced up at me, her eyes went wide, but not with horror. She said I looked completely normal and asked if I was the new patient she'd heard about on the phone earlier. The specialist told her yes and asked her to step outside again. The moment the assistant left the range of the device, I saw her expression change through the door window. She looked concerned again and mouthed something about calling an ambulance. The specialist turned the device off to save battery and explained the problem. These blocking devices were incredibly expensive to manufacture and hadn't been approved for public sale yet. Each prototype cost around $5,000 to build, and she only had 3 working units. The components were specialized and had to be imported from specific suppliers who didn't even know what they were really being used for. She let me borrow one of the devices and showed me how to use it. We set up my phone on a stand across the room and called my mom on video. I held the device close to my chest and pressed the activation button. My mom's face appeared on the screen, and for the first time in 2 months, she wasn't crying. She kept saying how much better I looked and asked what medicine the doctors had finally given me. She said my color was back and my eyes looked bright again. I wanted to explain everything, but the specialist warned me not to say too much over the phone. The wellness company had resources and connections that could make things difficult if they knew we were onto them. When I ended the call and turned off the device, my mom immediately texted asking if I was okay because I'd suddenly looked terrible again at the end. The specialist closed her laptop and leaned forward with a look that made my stomach drop. She explained that the wellness company had known about the glitch for over 2 years and had been quietly paying off victims to keep them silent. She pulled out a thick folder filled with settlement agreements and non-disclosure forms from people who'd figured out what was happening. Each settlement ranged from $30,000 to $50,000 depending on how much the person had lost. She showed me emails between company executives discussing damage control and how to minimize media attention. They'd hired a crisis management firm that specialized in burying tech scandals. The specialist stood up and walked to a filing cabinet where she kept evidence she'd been collecting for 3 years. She introduced me to Kyla Harrington through a video call on her shielded computer. Kyla was a data privacy lawyer who'd been building a class action case for 18 months. She had boxes of documents proving the company had destroyed evidence and deleted customer complaints. Kyla explained she'd already filed preservation orders to stop them from destroying more files, but they kept finding ways around the legal system. The woman who'd called me about the crowdfunding page turned out to be part of a support group, with 43 confirmed victims across the country. The specialist gave me their contact information and showed me their private message board, where people shared their stories. A teacher in Oregon had lost her job and marriage. A nurse in Florida couldn't work in hospitals anymore. A college student in Maine had dropped out after everyone thought she was dying. Each story was exactly like mine down to the smallest details. Kyla explained we needed more evidence before going public because the wellness company had connections to major tech companies who licensed their facial recognition software. These companies would fight hard to protect their investment and reputation. She said the legal battle would take years and cost millions, but she'd found investors willing to fund the lawsuit if we could prove widespread damage. I agreed to help gather evidence by reaching out to people who might not know what was causing their problem. We spent the next 3 hours setting up a secure online forum using encrypted servers that couldn't be traced. The specialist gave me a list of keywords to search for on social media to find potential victims. Within 24 hours, 12 people had joined our forum with identical stories. By the end of the week, we had 20 new members, including teachers and nurses and retail workers who'd all lost everything. They'd all used the same wellness scanners at different pharmacy chains across the country. The specialist worked late every night trying to develop a permanent fix while we built our case. She discovered the corrupted data had spread through interconnected databases used by hospitals and government agencies and social media platforms. Cleaning it would take months or possibly years of manual data correction. She estimated millions of facial recognition scans were infected with the false dying signals. I tried using the blocking device to go back to work the next Monday. The device only had a 10-foot range, which meant people across the office still saw me as dying. My manager agreed to let me work from home, but I could hear the doubt in her voice when we talked on the phone. She kept asking if I was really okay or just being brave. My coworkers sent care packages and get-well cards even though I insisted I was fine. 3 weeks after getting the device, Ryan finally agreed to meet me at the specialist's shielded office. I sat in the metal-lined room for 2 hours waiting for him to show up. When he walked through the door and saw me without the digital interference, his face crumpled. He dropped to his knees and started crying harder than I'd ever seen him cry before. He kept touching my face and arms like he couldn't believe I was real. He apologized over and over for not believing me and for moving out when I needed him most. He said watching what he thought was my slow death had broken something inside him. He admitted he'd been seeing a therapist who told him he was in denial about my condition. His mom had convinced him I was refusing treatment because I wanted to die. His friends said I was being selfish by not accepting help. Everyone in his life had reinforced the false reality created by the corrupted data. We sat in that shielded room for hours trying to figure out if we could save our relationship. The trust between us had been damaged in ways neither of us fully understood yet. He'd abandoned me when I was desperate for someone to believe me. I'd resented him for choosing to believe his eyes over my words. The specialist gave us contact information for a therapist who understood technology-induced perception problems. We scheduled our first appointment for the following week, but I could already feel the distance between us. The blocking device helped us have dinner together twice a week, but we had to eat at places near the specialist's office. Ryan started researching the technology on his own and became angry at how our data was used without consent. He wanted to sue the wellness company for destroying our relationship, but Kyla said emotional damage would be hard to prove in court. The support group grew to 60 members within a month as word spread through private messages and encrypted forums. Each new member brought evidence of the company's negligence and cover-up attempts. We had screenshots of deleted social media posts and recordings of customer service calls where complaints were dismissed. The specialist finally made a breakthrough with a software patch that could clean individual devices, but it had to be installed manually on each phone and computer. The next morning, I got an email from someone named Victor Gutierrez saying he'd been following our support group's private forum for weeks. He explained he was an investigative journalist who'd been tracking weird cases of technology, messing with how people see things for the past 3 years. He'd already documented 12 other situations where facial recognition systems had caused similar problems, but nothing as widespread as ours. We set up a video call, and Victor showed me folders full of research about perception-altering technology that companies had been developing since 2019. He said he had sources inside the wellness company who'd been feeding him information for months about what was really going on behind the scenes. His main source was a programmer who'd worked on the original scanner software and felt guilty about what happened to all of us. This programmer told Victor that the company discovered the glitch within 3 weeks of launching the beta program, but the executives decided to keep quiet. The scanners were making them too much money to stop, and they figured most people would never figure out what was causing their problems. Victor's source sent him internal emails showing the executives discussing whether to fix the glitch or just let it continue spreading. The worst part was learning that the wellness company had sold our facial recognition data to over 400 other companies, including social media platforms and security firms. Every single time my face got scanned anywhere by any camera or device, it reinforced that false dying signal to everyone around me. The corrupted data had spread through so many systems that cleaning it would take years, even if we could get access to all of them. The specialist called me that afternoon with news that made everything else seem less hopeless for the first time in months. She'd been working nonstop on a solution and finally figured out how to broadcast a counter signal that could neutralize the corruption at its source. The problem was that her solution needed to be implemented directly on the wellness company's main servers, where the original corrupted data was stored. Without access to those servers, we could only fix individual devices one at a time, which would take forever and cost millions of dollars. Kyla immediately started preparing legal documents to force the company to give us access to their systems through an emergency injunction. She worked for 3 straight days gathering all our evidence, including Victor's leaked emails and testimony from 68 affected people. The hearing got scheduled for 2 weeks later, and we spent every day preparing our case and gathering more proof of the company's negligence. When the hearing day arrived, I sat in the courtroom watching the wellness company's lawyers argue that what we were experiencing wasn't real. They brought in 3 different experts who claimed we were all suffering from mass delusion caused by reading each other's stories online. Their lead expert said our symptoms were psychological, and that we'd convinced ourselves we looked sick because we wanted attention and sympathy. The company's lawyers insisted there was no technological cause for our problems, and that giving us access to their servers would violate trade secrets. The specialist stood up to demonstrate her blocking device to the judge and asked for 2 volunteers from the gallery. She had one person look at me with the device on, and then with it off, and they described the dramatic difference in what they saw. The judge watched carefully as person after person confirmed that with the device on, I looked normal, but without it, I looked like I was dying. The company's lawyers immediately claimed this was just the power of suggestion, and that the device was basically a placebo that made people think they saw something different. We'd prepared for this argument by bringing in 30 people who'd been affected by the glitch to testify about their experiences. One by one, they stood up and described losing their jobs and watching their families fall apart because everyone thought they were dying. A teacher from Oregon broke down crying as she explained how her own children had become afraid of her. A nurse from Florida talked about being forced into psychiatric treatment because doctors thought she was delusional about her health. Each story was worse than the last, and by the time the 15th person testified, even the company's lawyers looked uncomfortable. The judge listened to 8 hours of testimony about destroyed lives and relationships before finally calling for a recess to consider the evidence. When court resumed the next morning, the judge ordered an independent technical review of the wellness company's entire system. The company's lawyers immediately objected and claimed this would expose trade secrets that could destroy their business. The judge cut them off and said public safety was more important than corporate profits, especially when there was clear evidence of harm. She gave them 72 hours to provide full access to the independent reviewers or face criminal contempt charges. While we waited for the review to happen, I started working with Victor to document everything for his upcoming exposé about perception-altering technology. He interviewed me for 6 hours about every detail of my experience from that first day at the coffee shop to sitting in the courtroom. Victor was planning to publish a series of articles that would reveal not just our specific situation, but the entire hidden world of companies manipulating human perception through technology. He'd found evidence of at least 8 other companies doing similar things with facial recognition and augmented reality systems. The scope of what was happening was so much bigger than just our wellness scanner glitch, and Victor wanted to expose all of it before more people got hurt. I knew my family needed to see what I'd learned, so I called my mom and sister and asked them to meet me at the specialist's office the next day. They arrived looking worried, and my mom kept trying to touch my face until I guided them both inside where the specialist had set up her demonstration. She turned off all the wireless signals in the room, and suddenly my mom gasped and grabbed my hand, while my sister just stared at me with her mouth open. For the first time in months, they were seeing the real me without any digital interference making me look sick. The specialist explained the whole thing about the wellness scanner and the corrupted data spreading through facial recognition systems, while my sister pulled out her phone and started researching everything she could find about the technology. Within an hour, she'd found dozens of articles about data privacy violations and facial recognition problems that nobody was paying attention to, and she got more and more angry reading about how companies were using our faces without permission. 3 weeks later, the independent reviewers finally got access to the wellness company's systems, and what they found was worse than we'd imagined. The corruption wasn't just affecting a few hundred people like we thought, but had spread to over 8,000 facial recognition profiles across the country. The reviewers sent us a preliminary report showing how the glitch had infected backup systems and secondary databases that fed information to hospitals and government agencies and retail stores. Every single affected person was being seen as dying or severely ill by anyone whose devices had downloaded the corrupted data. The wellness company's lawyers showed up at my apartment 2 days after the report came out with a settlement offer. They wanted to give each victim $50,000 if we'd sign papers promising never to talk about what happened or sue them in the future. Kyla called an emergency meeting of our support group and told us not to sign anything because accepting their money meant they could keep hurting people without consequences. But not everyone in our group agreed with her advice. Some people had lost their jobs and marriages and just wanted to take the money and try to rebuild their lives without fighting a long legal battle. The meeting got heated when a teacher from Oregon said she couldn't afford to keep fighting when her kids needed food and her mortgage was past due. Another member said we were being selfish, asking people to refuse money they desperately needed just to make a point about corporate responsibility. The group started splitting into 2 camps, with about half wanting to accept the settlement and move on, while the others wanted to keep fighting. I stood up and reminded everyone about the thousands of people who still didn't know what was happening to them. People were probably losing their families and jobs right now, thinking they had some mysterious illness when really it was just corrupted data making everyone see them wrong. We had a chance to expose this and stop it from happening to anyone else, but only if we stayed together and refused to be silenced. Most of the group eventually agreed to keep fighting, though 5 people took the settlement and left. The specialist had been working on something new and called me over to test it. She'd developed a phone app that could broadcast a counter signal to temporarily block the corruption, but it used so much battery that phones would die in about 20 minutes. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it meant we could go out in public for short periods without people reacting to us like we were dying. Ryan and I decided to try using the app to go on our first date in months. We met at a restaurant with 3 portable battery packs each and had to keep swapping them out every time our phones got low. The waiter didn't stare at me with horror for once, and we actually got through dinner without anyone offering to call an ambulance. It was weird having to plan our whole evening around battery life, but we were just happy to be together without the constant worry about how people were seeing me. Victor published his first article about the glitch 3 days later, and within hours, the wellness company's stock price dropped 40%. Investors started dumping their shares as they realized the company was facing massive lawsuits and criminal investigations. The article went viral online with millions of people sharing it and asking if they might be affected too. Victor's email filled up with messages from people describing similar experiences where everyone suddenly thought they looked sick. Our support group forum crashed from all the new people trying to join. We got over 300 applications in the first day after the article came out and realized there were probably thousands more victims who never figured out what was causing their problems. People had been committed to psychiatric hospitals or lost custody of their children because courts thought they were too sick to care for them. The stories kept getting worse as more victims found us and shared what they'd been through. The pressure got so intense that the wellness company's CEO finally agreed to testify before Congress about the facial recognition technology. He sat in front of the committee and claimed they had no idea the glitch could affect human perception this way, even though we had emails proving they knew about it within weeks of launching the beta program. 2 days after the hearing, a guy from their IT department sent an encrypted file to Victor with thousands of internal emails showing the executives had meetings about the glitch, starting just 3 weeks after launch. The emails showed they calculated it would cost less to pay settlements than to recall the scanners and fix the problem. One email from the CEO himself said the victims would probably never figure out what was happening, and even if they did, nobody would believe them. Victor posted everything online at midnight, and by morning it was on every news site with reporters calling the company for comments that never came. The FBI showed up at our support group meeting the next week with a whole team of agents who wanted to interview each of us separately about our experiences. They took copies of all our medical records and the test results showing we were healthy while everyone saw us as dying. The lead agent told me they were building a case for fraud and criminal negligence that could put the executives in prison for years. My mom called me crying after she saw the news and kept saying sorry over and over for not believing me when I first told her something was wrong. She started posting about it on her Facebook and Instagram, where she had thousands of followers from her cooking blog, and within days, hundreds of people were sharing their own stories about weird tech glitches. She organized a petition that got 50,000 signatures in the first week, demanding better regulation of facial recognition technology. The specialist got a call from the FDA saying they were expediting approval for her blocking device after seeing the congressional testimony and realizing how many people needed it. 3 medical device companies started bidding to license her patent with offers going up every day as they realized the market potential. She told me she never expected her small research project to become something that could help thousands of people get their lives back. Claire showed up at my apartment with flowers and broke down crying about how she'd described what she saw when she looked at me all those months ago. She said she felt terrible for telling me I looked like I was dying, even though she was just being honest about what her brain was making her see. We sat on my couch for hours talking about everything that had happened, and she offered to help with our advocacy work to make up for the pain she'd caused. The wellness company filed for bankruptcy protection the next week, claiming they couldn't afford to pay damages to all the victims, but Kyla discovered something suspicious in their financial records. She found transfers of millions of dollars to offshore accounts in the weeks before the bankruptcy filing and evidence they'd moved patents and other assets to shell companies. The judge ordered a freeze on all their remaining assets while investigators looked into what she called obvious attempts to hide money from victims. Ryan asked me to meet him at the specialist's office, saying he had something important to tell me, and when I got there, he was standing in the shielded room with a ring box in his hand. He said this was the only place where he could always see the real me without any digital interference, and even though it wasn't the romantic proposal he'd planned, it felt right for our story. I said yes, while the specialist pretended not to watch from her desk, and we laughed about how weird it was to get engaged in a medical office. Congress held emergency sessions about our case, and within 3 weeks they passed the Digital Perception Protection Act, requiring all facial recognition systems to undergo safety testing before deployment. The law included harsh penalties for companies that caused perception damage and required them to pay for treatment and lost wages for any victims. Our support group celebrated when we heard the news because it meant nobody else would go through what we did without having legal protection. The specialist's blocking technology got approved by the FDA, and insurance companies were forced to cover it, after our advocacy campaign showed it was a medical necessity, not a luxury. The devices cost $8,000 each, but with insurance, most victims only paid a few $100s, making it accessible to everyone who needed it. Production ramped up fast with the manufacturer running 3 shifts to meet demand, as more victims came forward every day. I went back to my old job with my blocking device clipped to my belt, and for the first time in almost a year, my coworkers could see me normally. My manager apologized for forcing me to take medical leave and said she felt terrible about not believing me when I insisted I was healthy. Some of my coworkers admitted they were the ones who started the crowdfunding page and felt guilty about doing it without asking me first. The lunchroom got quiet when I walked in on my first day back, but then everyone started clapping and welcoming me back to the team. Things felt different, but at least I could work again and start rebuilding my career after losing so much time to this nightmare. The specialist kept improving the technology, making newer versions, smaller and more efficient, so people didn't have to carry big devices everywhere. She won grants from medical foundations to continue her research into how digital signals affect human perception, and started training other scientists in her methods. Our support group kept growing with new members joining every week, as people finally understood what had been happening to them. Some had been suffering for years thinking they had psychological problems, when really it was just corrupted data making everyone see them wrong. We started local chapters in different cities, so victims could meet in person and share their experiences without judgment. The criminal trial was scheduled to start in 6 months, and prosecutors told us they had enough evidence to convict all the executives involved in the cover-up. 3 months later, we rented out the biggest conference center in Chicago for what we called the first National Digital Perception Victims Conference. I spent weeks calling everyone from our support group and posting on forums to spread the word about the event. The response was bigger than we expected, with over 300 people signing up in the first 2 days. We had to upgrade to a larger room twice as registrations kept coming in. People flew in from all over the country, and some even came from Canada and Mexico. Setting up the conference took every bit of energy I had left after work. We arranged panels where victims could share their stories and workshops on using the blocking devices. The specialist agreed to give the keynote speech about her research and how the technology actually worked. On the morning of the conference, I watched people walking in with their blocking devices clipped to their belts or worn as necklaces. Many of them were crying as they hugged each other for the first time without the digital interference. One woman told me she hadn't been able to look at her daughter normally for 2 years until she got her device. The conference lasted 3 days, and by the end, we had journalists from major newspapers covering our story. That's when things started changing fast. Within a week of the conference ending, several major tech companies announced they were reviewing all their facial recognition systems. Google found 17 different glitches they hadn't noticed before, and quietly pushed updates to fix them. Facebook discovered their photo tagging system had similar problems affecting thousands of users. Microsoft pulled their entire facial recognition program offline for emergency maintenance. Apple sent out iOS updates that fixed perception bugs in their camera apps. None of them admitted fault publicly, but the timing wasn't a coincidence. 6 months after that, the criminal trial finally started. I sat in the courtroom watching the wellness company executives walk in wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. The CEO who had lied to Congress looked smaller than I remembered from the videos. His lawyers tried to argue for bail, but the judge denied it, saying they were flight risks. The prosecutor laid out all the evidence we'd gathered, including the leaked emails and whistleblower testimony. She showed the jury how the company knew about the glitch and chose profits over people's safety. The defense tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding and that the executives thought the problem would fix itself. Nobody on the jury looked convinced. The trial went on for 3 weeks, with victim after victim testifying about losing their jobs and relationships. Ryan proposed to me during a break in the trial proceedings. He took me to the specialist's office where he could see me normally without any devices. He got down on one knee right there in the shielded room and asked me to marry him. I said yes immediately, even though it wasn't the romantic proposal either of us had imagined. We got married 2 months later in a small ceremony at a venue we made sure had signal blockers installed everywhere. It was the first time in over a year that all our guests could see me normally without needing their devices. My mom cried happy tears instead of worried ones for once. Ryan's mom finally stopped looking at me with that concerned expression. Our wedding photos actually showed me the way everyone else saw me that day. The specialist called me a month after the wedding with incredible news. She'd won the Nobel Prize in medicine for her work on digital perception and human cognition. She told me she was dedicating it to all of us who had the courage to come forward and fight. The prize committee said her research had opened up an entirely new field of study. She used her acceptance speech to talk about our support group and how we'd helped advance the science. The Nobel Prize brought even more attention to our cause, and suddenly universities were offering grants to study the problem. Around the same time, the insurance companies finally caved to pressure. After months of denying claims, they were forced to pay out millions to victims who'd lost jobs and relationships. My claim alone was for $200,000 in lost wages and emotional damages. The money didn't fix everything, but it helped us start rebuilding our lives. Some victims got even larger settlements if they could prove the glitch had destroyed their careers. One surgeon who'd been forced to retire got $3 million. The insurance companies tried to sue the wellness company to recover their losses, but by then the company had declared bankruptcy. Victor's book about our story came out that fall and immediately hit the bestseller lists. He'd spent months interviewing all of us and documenting every detail of what happened. The book sparked conversations on every major news network about technology and perception. He donated 20% of his profits to our victim support fund, which had grown to help hundreds of people. Bookstores couldn't keep it in stock, and Hollywood started calling about movie rights. Congress passed new regulations 6 months later requiring all facial recognition technology to include safeguards. Companies that violated the new rules faced fines of up to $50 million per incident. The Digital Perception Protection Act became law with unanimous support from both parties. Tech companies had to hire entire departments just to ensure compliance with the new rules. Some smaller companies shut down their facial recognition programs entirely, rather than risk the fines. I used my insurance settlement to start a nonprofit organization helping other victims of technology glitches. We set up a hotline and website where people could report problems and get support. In our first month alone, we helped 50 new victims who'd been suffering in silence. We provided them with blocking devices and connected them with lawyers who understood their cases. The organization grew faster than I expected, and soon we needed to hire staff. Finally, after 2 years of legal battles, the verdict came in. The wellness company executives were found guilty on all charges, including fraud and criminal negligence. The judge called their actions a complete betrayal of public trust before sentencing them. The CEO got 15 years in federal prison, while the other executives got between 5 and 10 years each. Ryan and I started house hunting 6 months after the verdict came in. Every place we looked at had to pass our special test where we'd walk through with signal detectors checking for dead zones and interference patterns. The realtor thought we were crazy until I explained what had happened to us, and then she started showing us older houses with thick walls and metal roofing. We found a place built in the 50s with plaster walls that naturally blocked most signals, and the previous owners had already installed copper mesh in the attic for their own privacy reasons. Ryan spent weekends adding extra shielding to the bedroom walls using special paint with metal particles mixed in. We tested it by having video calls from inside the room and watching my appearance stay normal on his phone screen. The contractors we hired to add more shielding to the rest of the house kept asking if we were building a safe room for the government. We just told them we valued our privacy and left it at that. My mom started coming over every Sunday for dinner, and we made a new rule that everyone had to put their phones in a metal box by the door. At first, my sister complained about not being able to check her messages, but after a few weeks, she admitted she actually liked being disconnected for a few hours. My dad started telling stories from when he was young and didn't have any devices at all. These dinners became the highlight of my week, because I could just be myself without worrying about any technology affecting how my family saw me. We expanded the tradition to include my cousins and aunts and uncles once a month. Everyone would pile into our shielded dining room and we'd play board games and talk for hours. My nephew said it was better than going to his friend's house where everyone just stared at screens the whole time. The specialist kept working on making her blocking devices smaller and better. She sent me prototypes to test, and each version got more comfortable to wear. The first ones had been bulky boxes that barely fit in a purse, but the new ones looked like regular watches or necklaces. She figured out how to use different materials that didn't need as much power so the batteries lasted for days instead of hours. Other victims in our support group tested them too, and gave feedback about what worked and what didn't. Within a year, she had versions that looked completely normal and could run for a week on a single charge. She partnered with a jewelry company to make them actually look nice instead of just functional. I wore a silver bracelet version that matched my other jewelry perfectly, and no one could tell it was anything special. 2 years after everything started, I went to the grocery store without even thinking about my appearance. The corrupted data had finally been removed from most systems after tech companies spent millions cleaning their databases. I could walk past security cameras without triggering false signals, and cashiers didn't look at me with concern anymore. It felt strange to be normal again after spending so long being careful about every public interaction. I still kept my blocking device on just in case, but I rarely needed it anymore. Our support group threw a huge party when the FDA finally ordered all the wellness scanners removed from pharmacies. We met at a park, and someone brought one of the old machines they'd bought from a pharmacy that was throwing them out. Everyone took turns hitting it with a hammer while we cheered and took photos. Some people cried as they destroyed the thing that had ruined their lives. Others laughed and made jokes about finally getting revenge on the machine. We turned the broken pieces into art projects that we displayed at our next conference. Local news covered the event and called it a victory for consumer protection. 3 years after our wedding, Ryan and I decided we were ready to have kids. Our daughter was born on a rainy Tuesday morning, and the first thing I did was make sure the hospital room's Wi-Fi was turned off. We named her Sarah, and from the start we were careful about her digital footprint. No photos on social media and no smart toys that could collect her data. We taught her early about privacy and why we didn't have the same gadgets as other families. She grew up thinking it was normal to have a house where certain rooms blocked all signals. Her friends thought it was cool that our house was like a fortress, and they liked coming over to play without their parents being able to track them constantly. When she started school, we had to explain to her teachers why we opted out of the facial recognition attendance system. Most of them understood once they heard our story. Looking back at everything that happened, I sometimes can't believe we actually changed things. Millions of people are protected now because we fought back against that company. The laws we helped pass prevent other companies from doing the same thing. Tech companies have to test their systems properly now and can't just release whatever they want. The money from the settlements helped victims rebuild their lives and start over. Some people still recognize me from Victor's book or the news coverage and thank me for speaking up. I tell them it was a group effort and we couldn't have done it alone. I still carry my blocking bracelet everywhere even though the danger has mostly passed. It sits in my purse next to my keys and wallet like a lucky charm. Sometimes I put it on when I'm feeling anxious about technology even if I know I don't really need it. It reminds me that we survived something that seemed impossible to fight and we won. Another thrilling episode of me oversharing on the internet. Want more? Yeah, I don't know why either, but you can subscribe for it.